Hi guys, Luke from the Sons of Obiwan. The lovely people here at Supanova have allowed me to get to interview someone who I absolutely adore as an artist and I would consider a friend.
Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Maak Raats.
Hi guys.
Okay, so I have known Mark, a bit of transparency, we've met through the wonderful people at Supanova. We've known each other for about 3 years now.
About that, yep.
And we've had a chat and got to know each other. And every interview I've seen with you has been very one-dimensional. It's all like, so if you don't know, Mark is would you count yourself as an official Lucasfilm artist? Is that a good way to describe it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yep, so Mark's done posters for the IMAX re-release of Indiana Jones.
Yep.
And you've done some work for Star Wars as well.
Yep,
what did you do for Star Wars?
30th anniversary of Return of the Jedi, and then the 40th anniversary for New Hope. Solo, of course, that is this year. So I know there's a fair amount.
Yeah. And so every time he gets interviewed, everyone's like, oh, you've met George Lucas. How is it meeting George Lucas? We'll get that out of the way.
I don't know George very well. I've met him on a couple of occasions, very briefly, but he's been very good to me personally. So I mean, I'm very grateful for the association and the opportunity he's given me to work in his world. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. So the reason I wanted to interview Mark was I found him to be a very interesting man, and I wanted to bring a little bit of the Maak Raats that ourselves and Supanova know and show you guys what a cool person he really is. So what I've done is I've written some questions out here. You'll see me checking from time to time. So, sir, obviously by the accent, you come from the African continent.
I do. I'm born and raised in South Africa, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Yep.
Yeah.
How was it? Were you rural, city?
No, we were city. Grew up. We did, as youngsters, we definitely did the farm thing, and did a lot of the bush side of it. But we grew up in the city. Yeah.
Now I've got a Bryce Courtenay view of Africa. I grew up reading The Power of One. It's one of my favourite books. How was it being? So, from someone who lives in Australia, how would you sum up growing up in Africa?
That was awesome. I mean, we had a very privileged lifestyle. We grew up in the shadow of apartheid, which made us, as white people, very privileged. And in fact, it's very much like living sort of in Australia today. It was a very organised and a very, albeit one-sided, governing system. Everything worked. It was very efficient, and we had a great upbringing. It really was. Fantastic.
Did you get to see wildlife and that sort of thing?
Oh, plenty. Plenty. I mean, it is. You grow up in Africa, and you really, you do all the wildlife things. Growing up and getting out there and doing it for sure.
Nice. Okay. So, what was your earliest exposure to pop culture?
I would say we didn't really have an enormous amount of exposure to to comics generally. We saw mainly the British comics like Beano and Dandy and things like that. I didn't have an enormous amount of exposure to the DC or Marvel universe for forever. But there's no doubt that the one comic that intrigued me right from when I first saw it, and that's sort of in the early 60s, was Hal Foster's Prince Valiant.
Yes.
Which was, his take on the whole Arthurian legend, which was awesome.
Famous for the bowl cut.
Absolutely. That's right, and that also had a huge influence on me in getting involved in art, because I looked at that and I just thought, this is just so cool. The fact that he could draw as well as he could, the fact that he could, it was clear even at that young age that he understood everything about what he was drawing. He knew all about armor, he knew about horses, he knew about castles, he knew about anatomy, he knew about composition, the way he laid out the panels and things. So what I used to do every Sunday, because it was on the back page of the Sunday Times, I would redraw those, trying to capture what he had done. I mean, obviously in my infantile way, I didn't do a particularly good job, but I learned an enormous amount when I was doing that. And so that, I would say, probably that was the first exposure to popular culture of some description, was through Prince Valiant.
Now, I've heard you talk very highly of Snow White.
Snow White.
Okay, it really wanted you to get into animation. What was it about the Disney style that really captured your imagination?
Well, I think I always considered Disney as the high watermark of animation. I mean, you look at the Warner's guys, you look at Jones, you look at guys who were just doing the most amazing stuff, the Roadrunner stuff that was happening. I loved that style, but the purity of the Disney style attracted me more.
Yeah.
And that is that while guys like Jones was doing amazing things and stuff I really loved, there's no doubt that what I saw in the Disney thing was a different level. They took everything to a different level. It wasn't quite a slapstick, it was more traditional movie making, but the art and the care of framing everything, the multiplane camera work that they used to do, that just intrigued the hell out of me, because I just looked at that and I thought, this is really the epitome of where animation needs to be. So I enjoyed, it's a bit like different comics and books that you enjoy for different reasons. There's no doubt I enjoyed all of the stuff that I was seeing at that level, but the Disney stuff to me was the finest crafted, and therefore to me was the area that I wanted to aspire to.
Now, did you have, I heard you in an interview saying that your parents are both artists.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
So do you think that's where your love of it came from? Like, was there a lot of art around you when you were a kid?
I mean, my parents, my grandparents, there was always music. They're musicians in the family, they're artists in the family. I don't know that I would say that I looked at that and said, well, Dad and Mom, they draw, whatever. It just was a natural way of doing things.
Yeah.
I can't for 1 minute say that I'm one of those artists whose parents never supported what they wanted to do or misunderstood me in my aspirations. They were so supportive, couldn't have wanted me to do better. My dad was just worried that I was going to live in a garret, and I mean, being a practical man, he was an engineer by trade, but he was also an artist in his own right. But it was something that they always supported. So I think it was just a natural way that we were, and that is that you just grew and you wanted to do art.
So when you were drawing as a kid, what sort of, I've heard you say you've studied fine arts, but it's not quite your jam.
No.
So what sort of art did you want to produce? Like, what was it just the Prince Valiant stuff, or did you start
anything,
portraits and just anything to improve the skills?
Anything. I mean, the fine art came later, and that's what I studied after I finished school. And I studied it specifically. I didn't want to learn illustration, because at that time I was working part-time at an advertising agency, so I was doing it for real in any case. The fine art came later because I wanted to loosen up the style that I had, and I wanted to be able to employ other techniques that weren't traditionally used in illustration. But coming back to your earlier question about what I was doing when I was younger, pretty much anything. I mean, if I found a book with Michelangelo drawings in it, I would copy them. I wanted to draw those. And if I saw a great cartoon, because I loved doing cartoons. I mean, I did cartoons like crazy. I loved the loose style of cartoons. I loved the way that you could actually put together something with an economy of line that just captured so much. So cartooning was something I always wanted to do, but I literally drew anything, whatever worked. I would draw Disney, I would draw the characters, I'd make up the cells, I'd do the backgrounds, and I'd do the cellophane, and I'd draw on the cellophane, paint on the back of the cellophane, so I'd come up with a single layer. But I mean, you can buy them now, the fine art prints that you can get. I mean, I was doing that back then just to try.
How did you find out how to do that? You didn't have the internet. So how did you, like, as children of the digital age, like I'm probably a bit closer to you than most people in the digital age. I remember that, but how did you find out how to do that?
Well, a lot of the animation stuff, my dad was into animation in a big way. So he was able to give me a lot of pointers as to how they'd done it. And then I do remember back in '67, I think, National Geographic brought out a book featuring Disney. And Disneyland, because that was the only one that had been built then, and the Walt Disney Studios. And in that book, they had in the National Geographic magazine, they had this page which showed how animation was made. So you had backgrounds, you had multiplane cameras, you had all sorts of things. And I remember just loving this book, because I suddenly realized my dad had helped me a bit, but this really showed me how the guys at the top were putting these things together. It's just a comic strip really of how it was made, but the comic strip was so informative that I used that obviously then as a template to understand how to take the animation sort of industry, or my interest in animation, to the next level.
So, school, what sort of student were you?
Oh, I wasn't a good student. I mean, I was okay. I mean, I wasn't bad. I wasn't the best. I certainly wasn't a diligent student.
Yeah.
I liked music. That was always good. And I realized that what would be interesting was I liked theatre. So I got roped into doing, theatre productions and things at school.
Favourite role?
Favourite role was when I was a bridesmaid. When I was a bride, no, I made a good bridesmaid. No,
yeah?
It was a good, I think it was in, what is it now, year 8. I think we did a Gilbert and Sullivan thing, and I was a bridesmaid. That was cool. Nah, I don't know. I mean, they're all different. I liked them all a lot, and that was fun. So,
do you sing?
I used to, yes.
Yeah.
I used to sing. I used to play the guitar and things. I mean, I still sort of try these days.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a time when I had to work out whether I was going to be a musician or an artist.
Hard decision, man.
So.
They pay a bit equally.
Well, I figured, look, a musician was useful because it got me to meet women. That was really handy. And but I always knew that I'd be a better artist than a musician.
Yeah.
So no, the guitar was good because it got me talking to ladies, which was always very useful.
Yeah,
at that age. So it was good. Yeah. But no, as a student, I wasn't a great student. I mean, I was obviously interested in art, but for the rest, I just did what I had to do to get by. And try and get a university entry pass, by the time I finished, but I wasn't interested. In fact, I hated school.
Did you? Yeah, me too, man. That's probably why I became a teacher.
Probably, yeah.
Okay, so after school, army service.
Yeah.
Okay, so were you a volunteer or
conscripted. So South Africa was involved in the war in Angola, which was very briefly, the Americans were concerned about the infiltration of the communist influence down south. Yep. The Cubans were very involved in Angola,
yep.
as were the Russians and the East Germans, and so South Africa.
So a very Cold War.
Oh, very much Cold War. Yeah, it was pretty much towards the end of the Vietnam War and beyond.
Yep.
So I think the war for us in Angola started in about 1970 and finished in 1989.
Yep.
So it was a very long war.
That's a long war.
Yeah, no, it was a long war. And also South Africa at that point was the custodian of Southwest Africa, as it was known then, since the Second World War. They'd been granted that as custodianship over that country,
yep.
and that country was looking to have their independence,
yep.
Which ultimately became Namibia.
Yep.
So there was a lot of fighting about their independence, as well as and they were all communist-backed regimes
yep.
at that time, or communist-backed freedom fighters at that time, and we were there to obviously not allow the infiltration of the communist influence further south. There's a huge misconception that the war in Angola was all about propping up the apartheid system, and that's not true at all.
Yep.
It was really mainly to try and at the behest of the Americans and with the support of the Americans, although they didn't admit to it at the time, to try and stop the infiltration. Bear in mind that the Vietnam War was grinding to a halt, and the Americans knew at that point that the next theatre of war that the Russians would be using their latest weaponry was in fact the Angolan War. So we often had CIA operatives with us when we were out on operation, because through that way we could capture weapons, hand them over to them, and they would, under the table, give us support as we needed it.
So what has the Army given you that you still use today?
Well, there's no doubt that the Army created the foundation that has made me.
Yep. The guns show that alone.
Everything about the way that I operate, good and bad, has come because of that thing. I was in for a long time, 2 years compulsory service full time, and then every year for 10 years after that, for between 2 and 3 months out of the year, you'd have to go back to do your duty. So I would say that, I'm a very practical man. I don't suffer fools at all. I'm not hugely embedded in the world of fantasy at all, although it's what I work in.
Yeah.
So I love my job, but I don't understand it a lot, which of course is always a challenge. So I would say, I'm ruthlessly disciplined in myself. I impose discipline on other people, which is not always appreciated, which of course I understand. Very, very regimented about everything that I do, which means that there's not an enormous amount of spontaneity in the way that I operate. So,
how did your experiences influence who you became as a person?
I think the same thing. You realize then that, that war is for keeps, and didn't matter where you were being confronted by tragedy, whether it was through crime-related incidents on the streets of Johannesburg, or whether it was in the bush in Angola or northern Namibia. There's no prize for second place. You've got to do your job. I wasn't a very good soldier, but I was surrounded by men who were. Yeah. I was a platoon sergeant by the end of it, and a staff sergeant by the very end of it. But I had good people around me who were certainly a lot better at soldiering than I was. I think I was able to make the hard decisions when it came to allowing guys to do things that weren't, in other words, to buck the system in order to make us more efficient and make my guys, or help my guys, do their job better. Yeah. I'd often not do it according to the book. Yeah. So I could make those decisions, but I wasn't necessarily a particularly good soldier. There were guys around me, I think, who were better.
Did it change your view on your homeland after your service, good or bad?
Yeah, I was angry because, when we first went in there, it was all about propaganda and all about trying to prop up the state as it was, with all sorts of weird rhetoric and things. And of course, a lot of the guys that we served with were particularly blinded by the propaganda of the day, and very supportive of the government. By the time I got to the end of it all, after 12 years of doing this, you just knew that this was just wrong. Everything about it was wrong. The war itself, even though it was being fought for a certain reason, was also, I just couldn't really support it in the long run, and ultimately it's what happened. Not that I didn't do my job. I had a duty to do, and I wasn't prepared to go to jail for it because I had a family and things like that. So I always felt that the best thing to do is to try and make a difference even where we were, rather than just being a completely destructive force, which is what would be the easiest way to do things. So I by that time it was something that was clear that had to change, and I was more than ready when it did change. That's for sure.
Now look, on a positive side from Africa, some of my favourite works that you have done, now your DeviantArt, Maak Raats DeviantArt, go for a trawl through there, some amazing stuff.
Thanks, man.
But some of my favourites I have of yours was it a Ndebele tribeswoman with the rings?
Yeah, Ndebele.
Ndebele. I looked it up on YouTube. I tried it.
Pretty close. Yeah, Ndebele.
The personal ones, the ones from your military service, and I found you were a little bit of like a Forrest Gump of South Africa, right? So you knew some of the guys from the Bang Bang Club.
Yes,
So for the guys that don't know, what's the Bang Bang Club?
Well, the Bang Bang Club, there's a movie about it if anyone's interested. It was a group of photographers, journos, who were very involved in shooting photography, which covered certainly the trauma in South Africa, the riots and the bomb blasts and all the things that were going off then. And they were guys that I knew two of them, one very well and the other not as well. They were an amazing group of people that documented the trauma of South Africa's independence in a very strong way.
So, Nelson Mandela, the picture of him laughing I love, because people, when they tend to do portraits of famous people, go for the very
Yeah.
That's the Nelson Mandela I saw in my head.
Sure,
right?
sure.
How did you get to meet him, and what happened?
I was, after apartheid, after the government changed over and the new government came in, I felt it was really important for us who had benefited from apartheid in the first place to invest back into the country as best you can. And one of the things that I used to do, or the company that I had back then, I became a patron of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, which was one of the charities that he had. And we used to handle a lot of the supportive information for when they used to do shareholder reporting.
Yep.
And so I was invited to an annual lunch with Mandela and a few other people who were there. Sometimes you go to the loo and you'd be standing next to the Prime Minister of England. And so it was that kind of weird, very weird thing.
Yeah.
But Mandela himself. Obviously, he was the sort of backing behind the whole thing.
Yep.
So it was an annual lunch that we had, and I'd take a few of the staff members who used to work with me, and we used to do the lunches with him. So I got to know him through that way, and met him on a number of occasions. And pretty much everything that you've heard about him is true. But the very important thing about him is that he never appreciated being the deity that people made him.
Yeah.
He always said very strongly that he was a very flawed individual, and that he was a very angry individual, and that people. Well, that's the point. And so there were a lot of things about him that I liked, because he didn't just suddenly become, as you see so often in Africa and other third world countries, where the people just decide that they are now above reproach or above criticism, and he was always for criticism, and if people wanted to criticize him, he would take it on board. I found him an intriguing man, and I also found that for the first time that I could disagree with things that he said without being angry about it.
Yeah.
So for the first time I could actually listen to something that he said. I could say, right, well, I don't agree with that, but I didn't hate him for what he said. It was a perfectly valid opinion which I might not share. And I found that really interesting. Now, the reason why I did that painting of him, it was actually just after he passed away. And because I'd spent time in his presence, the one thing that always I liked about him was the fact that he had a wicked sense of humor. And most of the photographs and paintings and things, he always looked so serious. And what I liked about the fact is that he wasn't always that serious. He did have a side to him which was like really, really good fun. And so what I tried to do in that painting was capture that spirit of the man that was different to the revolutionary and the guy who was there that people wanted to just deify because of what he had done. Not to take anything away from what he did. Of course, what he did was amazing. But I just wanted to put a more human side, a more normal side about the guy that I had sort of been very lucky enough to have got to meet on the odd occasion.
Wow. Okay. Let's go back to the art. Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about your art is the way you capture, especially women. I know you're very. You always sit there and go, women aren't my strong point as an artist.
Yeah.
But what I love about what you do is ones like Rita Fatowski from Edge of Tomorrow, or the Sharon Stone one you've just done.
Thank you.
Or the Sin City one, which you've just done, is amazing as well.
Thank you.
You capture the person. It's not just it looks like them. There's something in it. Do you get to know the character? How do you capture the soul of that person in the picture the way you do? Yeah, no,
I don't know the characters. I've seen Sin City, I've seen, Quick and the Dead, with Sharon Stone and things like that, but I don't know the characters. But what I've always been fascinated with are people. And if you look at somebody, you know that there's something very specific that defines that person. So anything that I do when it comes to portraiture is something that I've always been strong at. So it's not something it's always a struggle, but it's not something that I've battled and failed with. It's something that I can do. And with that has come a fascination with people. So I study people, and I like looking at people, and I try and figure out what it is about that person that makes them who they are. Now, when it comes to a movie character, you've got to make it more or less match the character that they are portraying in the movie. And with the Sharon Stone piece that I did, I liked the fact that she was this sort of cowboy kind of character, which would make her a female version of Clint Eastwood, which I personally don't think they exploited nearly enough in the movie itself. But I like the fact that she was like a female Clint Eastwood, and that's why the pose that I put her into was the Outlaw Josie Wales thing, where he's holding the two Colts. So to try and make the character even remind you of Clint Eastwood without being Clint Eastwood. You know what I'm saying? So the secret of it is to take existing reference and to change the reference so that it's not what everybody is used to seeing. But how you can try and capitalize as best you can to capture the essence of the person specifically, because the actor or actress, or however the right way to call it is now, that person still embodies the character. And that is vitally important, that you capture the person. So Sharon Stone needs to be Sharon Stone, but she also needs to be the character from Quick and the Dead, or Jessica Alba, or Harrison Ford, or Mark Hamill.
Beautiful. All right, now the amazing Justin from Legion Media has been goodly enough to give us some time. So I've got a final 5 quick questions.
Sure.
Do you use music when you draw?
Sometimes, not always, sometimes.
Is it something to, like, do you pick something that would work for the picture, or you just have something on in the background?
No, I'm not one of those guys who's got to listen to Star Wars to draw Star Wars. I just like whatever's playing is good.
Favorite thing to listen to?
I'm sort of the old school, so I mean certainly guys like Bruce Springsteen or the Beatles or Queen or something like that, would be the kind of thing that I'd listen to.
Beautiful. Who were you most starstruck meeting? That's from Michael.
I would say Mandela, without a doubt. I mean, I've met some good people. George, it was wonderful meeting George. But I think that Nelson Mandela was just something else, because it's another level. You're talking about
genuine effect on the world.
Well, I think that's the thing. You've got a huge footprint in the world, and that has been created by this individual. Whether you agree with his policies or not, and I didn't agree with all of his policies, and that's why I said earlier that you can disagree but still like the person. There's no doubt that his influence on the world was enormous, and I would say without doubt that was probably the biggest.
That's a cracker.
Yeah.
Okay, what are your 2 favourite movies?
That's a more difficult one, because I divide them up into a whole lot of categories. But I suppose, there's no doubt that Star Wars: A New Hope is a favourite, just because it got me into the industry. It's like picking a favourite artwork. You like them for different reasons. I do like science fiction, and I'd say that Blade Runner, and most recently the new Blade Runner 2, would probably also rank very highly as favourites of mine.
Beautiful. Can you say diplomatic immunity for me?
Diplomatic immunity.
Oh, come on, put the accent on. Give me a bit of Die Hard, man, just once. I've wanted to do this for years.
Diplomatic immunity.
Yeah, excellent. What is your happiest memory?
I don't know. That's an incredibly interesting question. I've never been asked that before. My happiest memory? Home. There's no doubt that growing up and home is, always, to me, is a happy memory. Family are very important to me. So anything to do with family is probably where I'd be the happiest.
Yeah, nice.
Without question. And that goes with both, my family, my wife and my kids now, and growing up. It was good. And still is. So yeah.
We'll wrap it up there. So thank you very much for your time.
Cheers.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for the great questions. They were fantastic.
Pleasure. All right, guys, go and check Mark's deviant art out. Please do support him. He's a struggling artist. His stuff's amazing. Thank you very much, Supanova, for giving us the chance.
Cheers.
Have a good one, guys.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.